Hi, how are you? I mean, really, how are you? And do you have somebody in your life that you can talk about how you are? I've been thinking about you as we move into this Advent and Christmas season and wanted to have a cup of coffee with you and just ask about you. Ask about how you've been, the term's coming to a close. And we're rolling into a season that is so mixed in its emotions and its demands. I know many clergy in my acquaintance really struggle with Advent and Christmas. They love the Advent and Christmas story in Scripture, and they struggle with what our society does with it. They know that there are so many different services for this time, and some of them are so remarkably beautiful, but there's also the commercial expectations. They know that in addition to all of those services that they have to prepare and plan for, there are family expectations. And we want to be faithful to the expectations of those who are closest to us. And so it's not surprising to me that many clergy find Advent and Christmas a difficult time. So if you are feeling that way, I wanted to assure you that you're not alone. I wanted to talk to you a little bit too about grief, which I know may not seem like a very Christmassy subject, but hang on with me. There's a lot of grief at Christmas, and it often goes unexpressed because in our society, normally we pathologize grief. We make it an abnormal thing. If you don't get over it, whatever the it is, very quickly, have you got somebody to talk to? Should you see somebody about that? As opposed to recognizing that grief is part of the bargain of being human. Grief is part of the bargain of loving. We don't like it, and so we put it away. And often people who are grieving at this time of year feel under particular pressure. They feel under particular pressure to exude and express things they aren't really feeling in order to fit in or in order to not make others uncomfortable. So I want you to be aware of your own particular grief. There are the usual griefs that are part of this season. There's often grief around how the circle around the table, either in our minds or in reality, has changed. Who's not with us that was with us last year? There may be the griefs that have to do with because of unemployment and other uncertainties, we're unable to celebrate the season in the way that we'd like to. There are all sorts of griefs like that. Added to those griefs this year, of course, are all of the challenges brought about by the pandemic. Talking to colleagues last week and two conversations, they were wondering about how or if they could get their adult children and grandchildren home over Christmas because coming to Nova Scotia involves 2 weeks of isolation. And by the time you spent your 2 weeks in isolation, is there anything left to the holiday? Is there any point? Other colleagues are concerned about older relatives who are in long term care facilities in other provinces, and we know how vulnerable they are. Perhaps there are people in your circle who have lost jobs or have had employment prospects dimmed or dashed, and they're not quite sure how they're going to get through the whole season. And of course, over all of this floats the miasma of the pandemic like an unpleasant fog blocking our view of the future. In another meeting last week, somebody said planning any more than 2 months out in this season, in this time, is crazy. You can't do it. But of course, you're planning now, or you're trying to. But as health regulations and the best wisdom of the local public health authority seems to change daily, who knows what we're going to be allowed to do? Who knows how many of those special things you're going to be able to do? And so, my first piece of unsolicited advice for you is to please take the time to be aware of your grief, to recognize what it is that you're feeling. You want to be on your best for the next few weeks. And one of the ways in which you can mess yourselves up is by not owning your own grief and identifying it. Because that grief will find expression. And sometimes, if we don't own it, don't acknowledge it, it finds expression in inappropriate ways. So take the time to own your grief. You may not be able to address that grief, but as a professional, sometimes you have to closet or bracket out your grief. You have to put it in a box. Like when we're doing a funeral for someone who, as well as being a parishioner, maybe someone with whom we have a deep bond of affection, we have to park our grief someplace else so that we can give leadership to the community and then deal with that grief appropriately. You've learned that lesson, many of you. You will learn that lesson. Apply it now. So that's the first bit of advice in our coffee conversation. The second piece of advice is that everybody else in your circle is feeling the same way, and that includes your parishioners. And so it's really important in this season to figure out whose grief is it anyway. You can listen to the grief of your parishioners, and they may be grieving some of the same things you are, and maybe other things, the traditions and the concerts and the gatherings and all of the other things that they associate with the season that they aren't able to do, particularly this year, after all of the burden of the year we've had. You want to listen, you want to care, but you please don't want to own. So when things start piling up on you, take a moment to ask the question, whose grief is this anyway? Is this grief that I need to hold in my heart? Or can I be the caring and competent and loving pastor of these people without owning their grief, acknowledging it, assisting with it, but not owning it? Third observation I'd like to offer to you, and you may know this already, you probably do. Grief wears many masks. In this year when we're all being advised to mask up, grief can be masked in many ways. One of the most common ways that grief is masked is in anger. People who react with anger that seems inappropriate, or it just doesn't seem right at this point. Like, why is so and so upset about that? Well, sometimes you may need to step back and ask yourself, are they channeling grief in ways that might be more appropriate done other ways? So be canny and be cautious in your reactions, recognizing that you may be experiencing grief expressed behind a different mask. And finally, maybe ending this on a little bit of a lighter note, are there things that you can rejoice in this Christmas? Maybe take some secret glee, and maybe people around you are actually rejoicing in some things, but they're kind of like guilty pleasures. How about the person who is so tired of doing the Christmas dinner year after year, but everybody wants to come for Christmas dinner, and so they put it on. And this year they don't have to because the groups are smaller and they have a secret little smile playing on their face. How about the folk, particularly the parents of young children, who are so grateful that they don't have to pack everything up and rush off someplace? That even while they may enjoy the interactions when they get to wherever that place is, there's a lot involved in moving a family and packing up young ones and leaving familiar settings. And so maybe there are people of whatever age who are secretly grateful that they don't have to make a trek to someplace else. Maybe there are those who are grateful for the fact that they don't have to go to the family gathering and listen to Aunt Edith's constant stream of racist comments. Or know that Uncle Tommy's going to get into the sauce and start doing or saying inappropriate things. Or they don't have to deal with those in-laws who always seem to be so critical, all the while smiling politely. Maybe there are people who are actually quite grateful that they don't have to scrub the house and decorate to the nines to satisfy the expectations of those who come for those traditional gatherings. Maybe they're grateful that they don't actually have to go to the company party. They don't have to buy a new dress or a new outfit. They don't have to lay out the money for the hotel room and so on and so forth. There may be people who, in this season, where we'll hear so much about what we can't do, are secretly grateful for that. Here's one for you. Again, talking to a couple of colleagues. Because of the way their congregations do their worship services, the congregations have decided not to meet on Christmas Eve, and they're going to record those Christmas Eve services earlier in the week. So my colleagues are actually looking at having Christmas Eve on their own, no obligation, for the first time in years. And this little smile creeps up and says, "Oh, they're trying to deal with their guilty grief." Enjoy it. Enjoy the opportunities that this season brings to you. One last request. As you're leading folk this year in worship, help them to be aware of the mixed feelings and that it's okay to feel whatever we're feeling. The pressure from society round about us is going to be even more tremendous than usual to feel certain acceptable thoughts. You know the Advent story. Look at it in Luke and Matthew. Without the Disney and Hallmark add-ons, it wasn't necessarily a joyful time. The future wasn't crystal clear. It was, in fact, a very uncertain time. And maybe, just maybe, it was a time that has great parallels to our own. And so as you lead people in Christmas and Advent preparation this year, may you know the grace of that Christ who comes regardless. Regardless of what you do and don't do, regardless of the traditions you observe or cannot observe this year, Jesus will be born in welcoming hearts. And in fact, unless he is born in welcoming hearts, all the celebrations at Bethlehem will be meaningless. Thanks for meeting with me over coffee. It's always good to talk to you. Be well, be safe. Please be good to yourselves. You are doing important work. You are valued and you are loved. And may God richly bless you at Advent and Christmas and in the year ahead. Until we chat again.